The morning Daisy found the blueberry muffin behind the cafe dumpster on 9th Avenue SE, she thought it was going to be a good day. It was still in the wrapper, not even dented, just fallen off a cart sometime before dawn, and lodged between the recycling bin and the alley wall. She'd spotted it at exactly the moment. She spotted the man in the expensive coat, sitting on the curb 2 blocks over, his face pressed into his hands, his shoulders shaking. She looked at the muffin. She looked at the man. Her stomach growled. She tucked the muffin into her jacket pocket and walked toward him. The February cold in Calgary was a different animal than cold anywhere else. It had a personality to it, a kind of indifference that made it worse than cruelty. It didn't hate you. It simply didn't care whether you survived. Daisy had spent 4 months learning this the hard way, since her grandmother Pearl's heart had started giving out, and the little apartment on 12th Avenue SE had become a place of medical bills and dimming lights and suppers that sometimes amounted to crackers and tinned soup split between 2 people. She wasn't complaining. Gran had taken her in 3 years ago when Daisy's mother, Colleen, died of a heart condition no one had caught in time. Pearl was Colleen's mother, which made her Daisy's only family. What Pearl was, more accurately, was everything. But everything had gotten smaller lately. Daisy had stopped going to school in November because the heating was unreliable and Pearl needed someone there. She'd learned which bakeries put their unsold goods out early, which supermarkets didn't lock the bins behind their loading docks, which church on 17th ran a hot breakfast on Tuesdays and Thursdays without asking too many questions. She had also learned the way children learn things they shouldn't have to, how to read the faces of strangers. The blank faces were fine, the angry faces you avoided, the sad ones, the ones that looked like they'd forgotten they were still standing. Those were the ones that made Daisy slow her steps. The man on the curb had forgotten he was still standing. His name was Richard Ashton, and until 40 minutes ago, he had been in his Lexus on McLeod Trail, heading toward a board meeting that would, in his CFO sister Helena's words, define the fiscal trajectory of Ashton development for the next decade. He had been on time. His tie was straight. His notes were prepared. Then he had passed the intersection at 9th Avenue SE and seen the date on a digital billboard, February 14th, and the carefully maintained wall inside him had simply given way. He'd pulled over. Somewhere in the older industrial stretch between the river and the tracks, a neighborhood the developers hadn't finished turning over yet. He'd sat in the car for 10 minutes, then 15, then he'd gotten out because sitting still felt like drowning. Richard was 52 years old. He had built Ashton Development from a regional contractor into one of Western Canada's most recognized construction firms. His name was on 2 public libraries, a children's hospital wing, and 400 kilometers of affordable housing developments across Alberta and BC. He was not the kind of man who sat on curbs in industrial back streets and wept. He was doing it anyway. February 14th. 2 years since Caroline. 2 years since the diagnosis had finally taken what 8 months of fighting couldn't hold on to. 2 years since he had stood in a room that smelled of antiseptic and fresh-cut flowers and understood for the first time that competence, his great and trusted currency, could not buy back the one thing he'd taken for granted. He hadn't been there at the end. He'd been in Vancouver closing the harbor contract. Helena had called him. By the time his plane landed, it was over. He hadn't forgiven himself for that. Not once in 2 years had he come close. He heard small footsteps on the cracked concrete. He looked up. The girl standing in front of him was slight, with dark eyes too serious for her face and hair escaping from a braid that had given up sometime yesterday. Her winter coat was a size too large, the elbows gone shiny with wear. She was holding something out to him in both hands, careful as if it were fragile. A blueberry muffin, still in its plastic wrapper. "Are you hungry?" she asked, "or is it something worse?" Richard stared at her. He'd expected her to ask if he was okay. Everyone asked that. It was the most useless question in the English language. This child had skipped right past it to something realer. "It's something worse," he said. She nodded, like that was what she'd thought. "You can still have it. Gran says food doesn't fix grief, but it keeps your hands busy." He almost laughed. He didn't. He took the muffin instead, because something about refusing it seemed wrong, like turning down a hand offered across a great distance. "Thank you," he said. "I'm Richard." "Daisy." He looked at her more carefully. The coat, the braid, the way her eyes flickered to the muffin and then away. "You should keep this. I think you need it more than I do." "I already decided to give it away," she said simply. "You can't undecide that." He broke the muffin in half and held one piece out to her. She took it without arguing. They sat on the curb together, two strangers sharing the only breakfast either of them had, while the February wind came off the Elbow River and the city moved around them the way it always did, indifferently, without cruelty, without care. He asked her how she knew these streets. She said she'd been learning them. He asked why she wasn't in school. She said it was complicated. He told her today was the anniversary of losing his wife. She was quiet a moment. Then she said her mother had been gone 3 years, and she still checked the door sometimes when she heard footsteps on the stairs. "I'm sorry," he said. "Me too," she said. He looked at his watch and swore under his breath. The board meeting. His phone GPS kept freezing, and he had no idea which direction the financial district was from here. "I know where Ashton Development is," Daisy said. "The tower on 8th, with the green glass?" He stared at her. "How do you know that?" She lifted one shoulder. "The green glass ones are always the real estate people." She stood and brushed muffin crumbs from her coat. "I can show you. I know a faster way than the main roads." She did. She moved through the back streets with the particular confidence of someone for whom the city's overlooked corridors had become more familiar than its front doors. She pointed out things as they walked. Which corner store had working heat in the back hallway? Which patch of sidewalk had heaved badly enough that you had to step sideways or you'd go down? Which alley connected to which without adding 3 extra blocks? "You know a lot about this neighborhood," Richard said, keeping pace. "I know where the warm places are," she said. "That's the main thing." Something tightened in his chest that wasn't grief, or maybe it was a different kind of it entirely. When the green glass tower appeared at the end of 8th Avenue, Daisy stopped and pointed. "There." "You're right." He paused. "Listen, I have a meeting I can't miss, but it should be done within the hour. Would you wait in the lobby? It's warm in there. And afterward, I was planning a proper lunch today. I could use the company." She considered this with an expression that was too measured, too careful, for a child her age. "Most buildings don't let me stay. That building has my name on it. No one will bother you. I'll tell the front desk myself." She looked at him for a long moment, taking his measure in a way that was unsettling and somehow completely fair. "Okay," she said, "but if you're not down in an hour, I'm not waiting." "Fair enough," he said, and meant it. The lobby of Ashton Development was warm and smelled of coffee from the kiosk near the security desk. The receptionist, a young man named Emil, set Daisy up in a chair near the windows and fetched her a hot chocolate without being asked. She wrapped both hands around the cup and watched the elevator numbers change, and tried not to notice how good it felt to be inside. Upstairs, Richard entered the boardroom and began. Helena Ashton, seated to his left, said nothing about the tardiness. She rarely said anything she didn't need to. At 58, she had the particular stillness of someone who had long ago determined that most conversations were transactions, and the trick was to get in and out without paying more than necessary. She had run the finances of Ashton Development for 19 years. She had also, for the last 3 of those years, been quietly redirecting a portion of the company's infrastructure contractions through a subsidiary account that Richard had signed off on once, briefly, during a quarter, when Caroline was first diagnosed, and Richard's attention had been, understandably, elsewhere. Caroline had known. She had been very careful about what she knew and what she said. Downstairs, Daisy finished her first hot chocolate and started on the second one Emil brought without comment. She watched the elevator numbers and counted floors and tried not to think about how long it had been since she'd been somewhere this warm. She was halfway through the second cup when the elevator opened and a woman stepped out who made the entire lobby go slightly quieter. Helena spotted Daisy immediately. She crossed the lobby in measured strides, and Daisy, who had learned to read faces the hard way, recognized the expression before a word was said. "Who authorized this?" Helena asked the receptionist. "Mr. Ashton, ma'am. He asked that she be kept comfortable until. My brother is in a board meeting and is not managing lobby policy from the 43rd floor. Helena looked at Daisy the way you look at something out of place that needs to be put back where it came from. This is a corporate building, not a drop-in center. Daisy set down her cup carefully. A junior project coordinator named Amelia, crossing the lobby with a file folder, caught the last 30 seconds of this exchange and stopped walking. Helena, Mr. Richard was clear that she should. Thank you, Amelia. Please focus on your deliverables. She's a child, Amelia said, and it's -18 outside. Your concern is noted. Helena turned to the security desk. Please see that she's escorted out. Amelia opened her mouth again. Helena looked at her, and the look was enough. Daisy didn't cry. She'd learned that crying in front of people who had already decided something about you rarely changed what they'd decided. She stood, put her hat on, and walked with the security guard toward the revolving door. She was 3 steps from the exit when she stopped. The wall to her left was a memorial display she had walked past coming in, too focused on the warmth to notice. She noticed it now. A framed photograph, a woman with dark hair cut close to her face, a quality of stillness in her expression, eyes that looked like they were still thinking of something kind. Below the photograph, a small brass plaque, in memory of Caroline Ashton, 1972-2024, she built with love. Daisy knew that face. She had seen it many times in a small private room at Foothills Medical Center, where she used to sit on a plastic chair in the corner and work through her homework while her grandmother Pearl adjusted a drip line or smoothed a blanket or simply sat with the woman in the bed, just sat with her. Because that, Pearl had explained, was sometimes the whole job. Being present, making the room feel less like a room. That's Gran's patient, Daisy said. Her voice came out smaller than she meant it to. That's the lady my Gran took care of. The security guard was professionally neutral. We need to go, please. My Gran had a letter for her husband. She was supposed to give it to him after. Daisy stopped. Is Richard the same one? Is he the husband? Outside, please. She sat on a bench in Olympic Plaza, 3 blocks from the tower, and told herself this was fine. She had been somewhere warm for an hour. She'd had 2 hot chocolates. Whatever came next was the same as it would have been anyway. She was still sitting there when she heard her name. Richard was crossing the plaza toward her without his coat, tie loosened, moving faster than she would have expected. He stopped a few feet away and looked at her with an expression she recognized, because she had worn it herself. The look of someone who knows something has gone wrong that they are responsible for. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't know what she'd done. I should have been more specific before I went upstairs. It's okay. It isn't. He sat beside her. Amelia told me what happened. She also told me what you said about the photograph. Daisy looked at him steadily. Your wife? Yes. My Gran was her nurse at Foothills, near the end. Richard went very still. Pearl, he said, and then quietly, as if testing the weight of a name he'd been carrying, Pearl Kowalski. Daisy blinked. You know her? I know her name. Caroline mentioned her. He paused. Once, she said there was a nurse who, he stopped, worked through something. I tried to find her afterward. I wanted to thank her. No one at the hospital would give out her information. Then Helena mentioned something about a complaint that had been filed. She said there might be complications if we made contact. Daisy felt a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. Gran doesn't file complaints. She never would. No, Richard said slowly. I don't believe she would. He looked at Daisy. Can I meet her, your grandmother? Daisy studied him the way she always studied people before deciding, looking for the place where the kindness stopped and the calculation began. In Richard's face, she didn't find that line. She's not well, Daisy said. She has good days and hard ones. I understand. Okay, she said, but you promised me a proper lunch first. I'm holding you to that. A breath came out of him that might have been a laugh. Deal. Pearl Kowalski was having a hard day when they arrived. She was in her chair by the window that overlooked the parking lot, wrapped in a blanket Colleen had crocheted the winter before she died. Her hands were swollen at the knuckles. She moved carefully, the way people move who have made a separate peace with pain. She looked up when Daisy opened the door, and her face softened the way it always did, purely, without reservation. Then she saw who was standing behind Daisy, and the color left her cheeks entirely. She knew his face from the newspaper. She had prayed, in a bewildered and private way, that she would never see it in person. "Mr. Ashton," she said. "Mrs. Kowalski." He stepped inside carefully. "I won't stay if you'd rather not, but I think something happened that I need to understand." Pearl looked at Daisy, who nodded once. Then Pearl looked back at Richard, and something in her seemed to reach a decision, the same kind of decision Daisy had made that morning in the alley, where you give the thing you've been holding because the weight of it has finally become greater than the fear of letting go. "Sit down," Pearl said. "Daisy, the gray box, top of the wardrobe. Bring it down for me." The box contained a birthday card from a patient 3 years past, a photograph of Colleen at age 7, 2 professional excellence certificates from the health authority, and a letter in a cream envelope with Richard Ashton's name written on the front in handwriting that stopped him cold the moment he saw it. Caroline's handwriting. "She wrote it in her last weeks," Pearl said, holding her mug in both hands. "She asked me to deliver it after. She was very clear. She didn't want it given to you while she could still explain things herself. She wanted you to read it when there was no one left to put into words what she meant." Richard did not reach for it immediately. "Helena told me you'd filed a complaint, that there might be legal complications." Pearl's expression went very careful. "I never filed a complaint." The heating unit clicked. The room was quiet. "Helena came to see me about 3 weeks after Caroline passed," Pearl continued. "She said you were consulting a lawyer, that there had been irregularities in the pain medication schedule during Caroline's final days. She said you were looking for accountability." Pearl's hands tightened around the mug. "I knew I hadn't made an error, but I couldn't prove it easily, and I thought, this man has just lost his wife. If he needs somewhere to put that, maybe that's—" She stopped. "I should have spoken up. I'm sorry I didn't." Richard picked up the envelope and opened it. Caroline's letter was 4 pages. It was written in her particular way, measured and specific, with occasional flashes of the dry humor he had spent 23 years trying to deserve. She wrote about the hospital room, the quality of winter light through the window, the particular gift of Pearl's presence. "She doesn't fuss," Caroline wrote, "which is a rare thing and an enormous kindness." She wrote about a child she had seen twice in the hallway and once in the corner of the room with a textbook. Pearl's granddaughter, serious eyes. They look after each other well. On page 3, her handwriting changed, smaller, more deliberate, the way it got when she was being precise. She had been going through the quarterly reports on her tablet, she wrote. She had a great deal of time and old habits. She had noticed something in the infrastructure account, a discrepancy she had nearly set aside, except that the account number was one she recognized, because it was the account Richard had signed a modification form for 18 months prior. During the week, her diagnosis had come through, when he had signed whatever Helena put in front of him, without reading it the way he usually did. She did not blame him for that. She had not told him at the time because she hadn't been certain, and she would not ruin what time they had left with an accusation she hadn't yet proved. She was certain now. She had screenshots. They were saved in a cloud folder. The password was their anniversary date, followed by the name of the place where they'd first danced. And then, near the end of the letter, the handwriting loosened slightly, became more like the Caroline he knew at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings, unhurried. "You were not there at the end. I need you to know that I don't hold it against you. I asked you to keep the work going. You were doing what I asked. I married a builder. I knew what that meant. Please stop carrying it. If you ever find Pearl and the little girl, be kind to them. They were kind to me when I was afraid. That's reason enough." Richard read the letter once. He folded it along its original creases and held it in his lap for a long time. Daisy sat on the floor beside Pearl's chair and said nothing. She understood, in the quiet way, children understand things they haven't been taught, that some moments don't need filling. What followed happened in steps, the way difficult things do when someone finally stops holding them at arm's length. Richard called his lawyer from Pearl's kitchen that afternoon. He called the RCMP's commercial crime unit 2 days later, after a forensic accountant confirmed what Caroline's screenshots showed. Helena resigned from Ashton Development on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday, charges had been laid. She did not fight them publicly. She had always known the evidence existed somewhere. She simply hadn't known where Caroline had put it. Pearl was moved within the month to a private care facility in Inglewood, where the physiotherapy was good and the windows faced east. Daisy transferred to a school 6 blocks away. Richard set up an education trust and a housing arrangement that Pearl accepted only after making him promise she could send food on his birthday. He agreed. Daisy went back to school and discovered she was 2 grades ahead in mathematics, which pleased her greatly and surprised no one who had watched how precisely she navigated the city. She visited Richard's office sometimes on Friday afternoons, sitting in the chair by the window with her textbook while he dealt with whatever a CEO deals with at the end of the week. Occasionally one of them would say something and the other would answer. Neither pushed for it to be more than what it was. It was already enough. In April, when the Elbow River was running high and the poplars in Roxborough were just beginning to leaf out, Richard drove to the cemetery in the south end of the city. He had been going every month. It wasn't something he had planned. It had simply become what he did. Daisy had asked if she could come. He had said yes. She stood beside him at the headstone with her hands in her pockets, reading the inscription the way she read most things, openly, without looking away. "Did you love her very much?" she asked. "More than I knew how to say," Richard said. Daisy thought about that. Gran says she was the bravest patient she ever had. She didn't cry once. Richard looked at her. "She cried," he said quietly, "just not where anyone could see." Daisy nodded, the way she nodded when something confirmed what she had already suspected about people. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and produced a small thing, a single stem of creeping phlox, purple, that she must have picked from a garden on the way. She crouched down and set it at the base of the headstone with both hands, careful, the way she had offered him the muffin in the alley that February morning. Like it was the only thing she had, and like that was exactly the right amount. She straightened up. She slipped her hand into Richard's, not because she had been taught that this was what you did, and not because she knew the proper shape of comfort. Only because she had spent enough of her life carrying grief inside a quiet apartment to know that some weights were simply not meant to be held alone. Richard held on. Above them, the poplar leaves moved in the April wind, pale and bright the way new things are, before the world has had a chance to change them. And for the first time since the night he had stepped off that plane and walked into a room already quiet with loss, Richard Ashton understood, in the way that can only be given, never taken, that kindness, even the smallest kind, even the kind that costs everything a person has, does not disappear into the air. It finds its way home.